As you turn to John chapter 4, as of about 45 minutes ago, happy Rosh Hashanah. Look at you all, look at me like, huh? Jewish New Year began about 45 minutes ago, at least in this time zone it would have been. And speaking of Jews and Israel, when Brother Skeving talked about when I was in Israel, you're in Jerusalem and you think you're halfway a world away, and then you hear this, Brother Love, and you go, oh no, they found me. I should have gone further. Brother Skeving comes around the corner, and it's like, oh, okay, you're okay, you know. And then near the end of our trip, I go to Bethlehem, and that's Palestinian, so you have to kind of leave the watch of Israel and you go into Palestinian territory. And I'm having lunch, and all of a sudden there's a voice in the background that goes, I'm looking for James Love. I go, oh, they did find me. But it was friend brother Isa Kumsia, I'm not sure I say his last name right, but he's a Palestinian, and he's here tonight with his wife, and they are in a church in Canada. And I came down here to hear us, and thank you for your friendship. And I recognize him tonight as being all the way. You have a Palestinian in your midst tonight. And it's Rosh Hashanah. But we're here to hear the Bible, the Word of God. He talked about brother love. Brother love. I'm going to talk to you older people, because the younger people are going to have no idea what I'm talking about. Neil Diamond. Speaking of a Jew, you may not know that, but Neil Diamond began his first singing as a cantor in the synagogues in Brooklyn, New York. Neil Diamond had a big hit. Anybody know where I'm going? I can see some of you do. Big hit. Brother Love's Traveling Salvation Show. Y'all remember that hit? No. Something like, grab the old ladies and kiss all the babies, and everyone, let's all go to Brother Love's show. And I thought it was a good song. And so far, I have every business meeting, I present that as a theme song of our church, and so far, it has not happened yet. So, anyway. I do believe that tonight, and I want to give my support, and I want to say that my dear friend and Brother Bill Prater, and it's been great to be able to, thank you for Brother Skeving for letting, nobody else invites us to be at the same place together. You all do know that Brother Skeving invites us, and then he gets everybody else to take us out to lunch and take care of us. You know that. I brought them here. You guys can take it. You can deal with them. But we get to spend time together, and he's right. We are best friends. Our families, our lives have entwined. God brought it together. We didn't orchestrate that. And may I say that my heart has been broken for what my friend has experienced in the loss of his son and in ministry and the things going on. And tonight's message will come from a heart that, let me put it this way. You hear about cooking. God tenderizes us, doesn't it? God tenderizes us in his own way. And what you're going to hear tonight is a message from a heart that's been tenderized through experiences and through God's working. And I want to give that time, and I want to put that out there. And I really want you to prepare yourself in your heart for Brother Prater's message, which follows mine. So therefore, I'm done. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not done yet, but I will be. All righty. I hope to be some kind of encouragement to you as a preliminary before his message tonight. Listen to this poem. The sky is deep. The sky is dark. The light of the stars is so stark. When I look up, I fill with fear. If all we have is what lies here, this lonely world, this troubled place, then dead cold stars and then empty space, I see no reason to persevere, no reason to laugh or shed a tear, no reason to sleep or ever to wake, no promises to keep and none to make. So at night I will raise my eyes to study the clear but mysterious skies. The arch above us is as cold as stone. I ask, are you there, God, or are we alone? This comes from an old classic book called The Book of Sorrows. And this is how a New York bestseller book by Dean Koontz, you may have heard of him, and the book is named Soul Survivor, and this is how this book begins. It's about a man named Joe Carpenter who loses his wife and 2 young daughters in a plane crash. The story picks up after the introduction with this poem. The story picks up at the 1-year anniversary of this crash. A year later, they've been gone. And how that even a year later, Joe Carpenter didn't seem to be doing well dealing with the death of his wife and 2 daughters. He was having anxiety attacks. In his mind's imagination, he would picture his wife and 2 daughters holding hands as the plane descended and reaching out and pulling the girls to her as the cabin began to fall apart. In his mind, he could hear the whine of the engines, the twisting of the metal, and then finally the impact of the plane as it hit the ground. It was so real to him that sometimes he felt he could smell the burning of the plane as it burst into flames, and he felt himself choking with smoke. It was all in his head, but it was real. The rest of the book goes on to talk about how that Joe had to find some significance in order to keep living. The search for significance is nothing new. I was reading a book, had it on my desk. It's a 60-year-old book. Not too long ago, it was called The Search for Significance. And many books have been written on this subject. Pop psychology is directed at making people feel significant. And may I say, sadly, a lot of preaching today isn't about God and it isn't about the Bible, but it's about making people feel good about themselves, about self-esteem and significance. The word today is often used, self-esteem. Self-esteem, in many cases, is indeed, we need to recognize it, a very fragile thing. From 1982 to 1993, there was a TV show that was very popular named Cheers. I don't remember ever watching it that much, but I can remember the catchiness of the tune that came on. And I remember it, and I went back and looked at the words because there was a line in there that always caught my attention. And it hits at the ideal of Anita's significance. And they presented a bar life, and a fun bar life, of course. But it says it's a place where everybody knows your name. And they're always glad that you came. You want to go where people know people are all the same. You want to go where everybody knows your name. This touches what many of us want. Where you're accepted for who you are, where you can drop the mask, where you feel that you have a place and you're significant, a place where, warts and all, you're accepted. I think of the Cheers song after I live about 4 miles from my church, not very far, but I go through a little small town, a little bitty burg called Mount Healthy. It was a refuge from the cholera epidemic. That's how it's got its name. And in there are 3 or 4 bars. And when the weather's fine, the big windows will be open, the doors will be open, and I can't help. It's just something I've done. I mean, I've been doing this for 30-something years. I slow down and I look in. I'm not interested in going in a bar, but I see people in there, and I wonder how many of them are there regularly. I wonder if when they walk in, does everyone go, "Hey," call out their name and say, "Good to see you." Do they know each other? Because I have to admit, there is something appealing about actually having a place to go where people are actually glad that you're there. Sure. Something somewhere that gives you significance. I hope, and I would hope for all of you, that would also be your home. When you walk through the door, I said I had 3 little girls. I remember today when I walked through the door and they, "Daddy's home," and they would all come home, come over and hug me, jump on me and everything else. And then they became teenagers. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, baby, come over here and give me a hug." "That's all right. Thanks, Dad." And then I'd have to chase them. I hope your home is a place where you find significance. That ought to be the main place where you find it. You will listen closely. I know of a place or something that you can go to. And out of this place, you can draw deep satisfaction. It's a place that will always make you feel significant when you feel that there is no other place to do this. This place makes you realize how much value you really have as a person. So stick with me as we walk through this. I won't be long tonight. In John chapter 4, are you there? In John chapter 4, there was a woman that was probably once a sharp young girl that created a lifestyle of looking for greater satisfaction. She tried out a lot of things, including a good number of marriages. And she finally decided to forget marriage and just live with the guy of her choice. She speaks comfortably with men, so she responds easily to Jesus. After all, what does she have at stake? She's not ignorant. In fact, she tries to point out religious differences, gets in a little bit of a theological tussle with Jesus about Samaritan theology and Jewish theology. The pretty but tired face of a girl that has probably aged before her time. She walks with her head uncovered. She walks alone. Jesus uses the well that he's sitting on to bring out a spiritual point that actually has Old Testament precedence. Verse number 13, let me give you some of these points very quickly. Verse number 13, Jesus answered and said unto her, "Whosoever drinketh of this water shall never thirst again." He made the point very clearly that guess what? Physical never fully satisfies. And if there's anyone that should know that, it ought to be this girl. The physical just does not satisfy. It might satisfy for a little while, but it never fully satisfies. In verse 14, the first part says, "Whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst." Jesus makes a second point that only he has the potential to fully satisfy. The physical never satisfies, but he can offer something that can satisfy. In the second part of verse 14, "But the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life." Not only does the physical never fully satisfy, not only does only Jesus have the potential to satisfy, But when Jesus satisfies, it's a perpetual satisfaction. It's an eternal satisfaction. Jesus is not going to just satisfy you in your 20s. He will satisfy you in your 40s and your 50s and your 60s. And when things start changing and when body starts hurting and things start happening and the person in your mirror starts looking different, he still can satisfy. When you are taking your last breath on your hospital bed, know this, he still can satisfy. And Jesus makes this point. He promised her very succinctly that something that she had probably been looking for all of her life: significance and satisfaction. But just not in the relationship and not just in the moment. She was looking for value, and value not built upon conditions. She needed self-esteem that's not built upon an acceptance or a performance of some kind. Worth, satisfaction, acceptance, a place of belonging. In fact, what Jesus was promising her was almost too good to be true, hard to be believed that so much could be promised. We all need a place of significance. You need to know that you are valued. You mean that? I hope none of you have ever been raised with a parent that tells you you're not worth anything. Even though my dad always told me I'm a worthless nut. I think he was kidding. I know that I don't have all these talents and abilities, but I know this. Tomorrow I'm going to get on a plane and I'm going to fly back to Cincinnati. We have a grief share tomorrow night that I'm going to go to, and I'm going to, do our ministry in that. And as soon as it's over with, I'm going to go home and I'm going to see my wife. We've been married for 42 years, and we were dating a few years before that. And I got news for you. If you don't want me here, that's okay, because I want you to realize something. She's the one that makes me feel significant. When I walk through that door, guess what I find? Acceptance. I'm always welcome there. No matter how bad of a day I had, no matter how much I messed up, I find that there's a cute little lady standing back there with her arms wide open, willing to say to me, I love you, I accept you, you're significant to me, you have value to me. And you know what that does? That helps me make it through that day. And then before I know it, that helps me make it through that week, then that month, and then that year. Go with me now, please. Keep your marker there in John 4. Go with me, though, to Isaiah chapter 12. Isaiah chapter 12. We talked about a woman that was in need of significance, in need of value affirmation. When you get to Isaiah, and in this section of Isaiah, and in chapter 12, we're not looking at a woman that needs this affirmation, but you're looking at a people. The nation of Israel was looking for significance. They were afraid that God had written them off. One of my favorite stories about World War II, inside of the camps one time, there was a large number of Jewish rabbis that were in one of the concentration camps. And so they decided, being Rabboni, leaders, they decided that they needed to address something. And so they came up with a board, and they sat behind it, and they had discussions. And they put God on trial. These rabbis put God on trial because they said, look, Us Jews are being persecuted. We're being killed, and we're in a concentration camp. And we think that God has not been faithful to us Jews, and we think that God has washed his hands and walked away from him. And so they had a trial to see if God was guilty of not being a good God to the Jews. And you know what their decision was? They found God guilty of not being faithful to the Jewish people. But they had to hurry up and finish. This is what's funny. They had to hurry up and finish the trial. You know why? It was prayer time, and they all had to go pray. Just go put that together. Nation of Israel was very similar in this right here. They heard of God's judgment. They felt that they had no purpose. I could put it this way. The nation of Israel, in this section of Isaiah, and what it addresses, you could say the nation of Israel was suffering from low self-esteem. Then Isaiah spends a few chapters encouraging them that they were still important to God. A day would come when Israel would be restored. He assured them of that. It was not all dismal. Isaiah wanted them to know that they were still significant to God. In verse number 1, you find he makes this point. In that day, whenever God affirms this to you, in that day thou shalt say, O Lord, I will praise thee. I will praise thee. Why? Because, look at the rest of verse number 1. Because thou wast angry with me, thine anger is turned away, and thou comfortest me. I can praise you, God. And Isaiah's making this point. Nation of Israel, you're significant to God, and there's coming a day when you think God is angry with you, but his anger will turn to comfort. And when that happens, you will wind up praising God for who he is. Verse number 2. Behold, God is my salvation, and I will trust and not be afraid. He says right now you don't trust God, but you will trust God, and you won't have fear anymore. You won't be afraid. You will praise. You will trust. Second part of verse number 2, he says, and you will say, the Lord Jehovah is my strength and my song. He is my strength and my song. You will praise him, you will trust him, and you will realize God is your strength and your song. And at the end of it, he says, you will come to realize, even though it seems like God is not there right now, that God is your salvation. Yeah, it's good. Now, all this is internal. My anger, God's anger is turned. My fear is turned to trust. I have strength like I didn't have before. I have a song, and it soothes my soul. These are the things that become characteristic. Now understand this. Look at these two verses. These are the things that become characteristic of the person that comes to an understanding that God is your salvation. Is God your salvation? If God's your salvation, you can know this. His anger has been turned. Your fear of God, now you can trust God. You can have strength in God. You have a song that you didn't have before. These are things that should indwell you now. And then verse number 3. If you'll notice, the first word is therefore. Because I have all these things in verse number 1 and verse number 2. Therefore, I know God's anger's turned. I know I can trust him. I know I have strength. I know I now have a song. Guess what I can do? I can, with joy, go to the well of my salvation, and I can draw water out. Do you get the meaning of that? Do you know when you can go to the well of your salvation? Whenever you want to go to the well of your salvation. Jesus made the point that it will come springing up inside of you, an everlasting, living, eternal spring of water. And I got news for you. I've come to learn in my life that one of the reasons why I find myself sometimes, feeling like an outlier, like depressed or not happy or negative, it is simply because I have forgot that I can drop my bucket, if you will, into the well of my salvation, and I can bring out with joy what God has done for me. I can do this anytime. I can do this while I'm sitting in my chair. I can do this when I'm in an airport. I can do this while I am dealing with bad situations and I feel that people don't like me. I can say, oh, this is awful. It might be awful, but guess what? I need to remember I've got a bucket that I can dip into the well of my salvation, and I can be reminded that my God's anger is not to me anymore. I can trust him. I don't have to fear him. I have strength. I have song. I should have a joy no matter what's going on in my life. Verses 4 through 6, second half of this psalm, it's kind of like the internal part of the well and the external part of the well, the outside of the well, if you will. These are things from the inside: fear, trust. These are all inside of me, right? But notice the outside. See, the well has a hole on top of it. You know that, don't you? Wells have holes on top of it, right? Yeah. Anybody know what Marzi dotes are? You all don't know what Marzi dotes are? Oh my goodness. When you get a chance, Google Marzi dotes. Don't do it now. Put your phones down. Don't do it now. There are a bunch of songs. There are a bunch of silly songs and fun songs from like the 20s and 30s. All right. But in one of those songs, it says, the well water still just hasn't tasted right since Grandpa disappeared. That had nothing to do, and it's not my outline or anything. That was of the Spirit. I don't know which spirit, but that was of the Spirit. Some spirit. But water has to come out through the top. And so verse number 4, it says, and if you notice, verse number 1, the first half of this, if you know chiastic structures, or you know the structures of Hebrew poetry, you know that this is a Hebrew poetry structure. Verses 1, 2, 3, and then verses 4, 5, 6. And if you look, verse number 1 and verse number 4, the first half and the second half, they start the same way. In that day thou shalt say. And verse number 4, and in that day shall ye say. All right? We're going to say things about the inside, about how God's wrath is turned, and how that we can trust, and how that we have strength now, we have a song now. But look at how God's salvation plays out on the outside in verse number 2. Thou shalt say, praise the Lord, call upon his name, declare his doings among his people, make mention that his name is exalted. In other words, when you can draw water out of the wells of your salvation, it's just not for your own satisfaction. There's a public witness that should come with that. And it's very clear in verse 4, you're going to praise his name. You're going to do more than praise and call upon his name. You're going to declare. Isn't that great? You're going to declare his doings among the people, and you're going to make mention that his name is exalted. Let me tell you something. One of the reasons why we don't talk about our God enough is maybe we're not dipping our bucket into the well of our salvation and pulling it out, because when we do, it should be natural that we should speak about our God. We want to include him. We want to credit him. We want to promote him. All that's found in verse number 4. In verse number 5, we're going to do more. We're going to sing unto the Lord. Why would we sing unto the Lord? Because, for he has done excellent things and is known in all the earth. You say, well, it doesn't look like it on the news. Let me tell you something. My God has done a whole lot more that the media has no idea about. My God has done great things, and he will continue to do great things. And they will never recognize him for them until one day he's standing before them and they won't have a choice. Not only do I have a bucket that can bring out and make me a bucket of praise. In verse 5, I have a bucket of song. Isn't that good? I have a bucket of praise and I have a bucket of song. You say, well, I can't sing very well. My dad has a wonderful booming bass voice. He does. I give anything to have my dad's voice. Like I said, when he begins to speak, it's like thunder starts rolling. It just rolls over the hills. But he can't sing worth it. It's awful. My dad was once sharing to the church. He says, you ever been in the car by yourself and felt the presence of God? He said, you got some Christian music on and it begins to minister to your soul. And he says, the next thing you know, he says, it's as though the Holy Spirit's sitting right there next to you. And he says, and you're singing and you're praising God and you got tears running down your cheeks. Y'all ever been there? And one of the deacons raised his hand. He said, Brother Love, if you were singing, I know why you had tears running down your cheeks. It really is too bad my dad can't sing because he's got a great, great voice. No, I have a bucket of praise. I have a bucket of song. But look in verse number 26. Cry out and shout. Cry out, shout. Thou inhabitant of Zion, for great is the Holy One of Israel in the midst of thee. I have a bucket of exaltation. I have a bucket of just proclaiming the greatness of God. Well, what does it do? It says two things. I should cry out and I should shout. These are the two things that I should do. Now notice that all these are on the outside. Notice declare, make mention, sing, cry out, and shout. Once a person learns to draw from the well of their salvation, then it should spill out. David said it like this, my cup runneth over. We need to reach down inside our well of salvation and bring out a bucket of praise, a bucket of song, a bucket of exaltation, and that should not be hard because you know why? The waters of salvation, they run deep and they run continually. What did he tell her? He said, the water that I shall give thee shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life. They are waters that spring up, an everlasting spring. Go with me back to John chapter 4. John chapter 4. I think you can see that whatever happened inside of this woman in the rest of the interaction with Jesus, that she now had significance. Look in verse 28. The woman then left her water pot and went her way into the city and saith to the men. Oh, she came for water. Who cares about water now, right? I'm going to leave the water pot. Something bigger was going on. And in verse number 29, what'd she say to the men? Come and see a man which told me all the things that ever I did. Is not this the Christ? See, she had to recognize one thing that you and I should always recognize. In her insignificance, she was all alone. But Jesus made a point. I must needs go through Samaria. He made a point to sit on that well. Because you know why? This woman was significant. She was so significant that he reached out to her, told her everything that she ever had done, and at the same time gave her a feeling, a sense of acceptance despite everything that she'd done. You know, true love, listen, this is good for all churches to just chew on. True love knows the faults, knows the bumps, knows the warts, and accepts anyway. Accepts anyway. I don't go around near as much. I don't travel and preach out like I used to. I've just kind of hunkered down for a number of years. But I'll go to these conferences once in a while, and they'll talk about, oh, and you got all these people, and they're all tattooed up to their ears and pierced, and they got all this metal in their head and in their nose. And I go, yeah, it's pretty gross. I agree. I've always thought it amazing that people will say to their kids, keep your fingers out of your nose. Quit putting things in your nose. Keep your fingers out of your nose. Oh, it's jewelry? Oh, that's okay. When did that happen? But you know what? You come to my church, you know what you're going to see? You're going to see a lot of tattoos. You know why? Because these people got saved. They got saved. And I got up one time, and I think I made them mad, and I said, listen, you may not like tattoos, but I got some really good people that gave their lives to Christ. And they come in, and all their life, the past life is on them, and it's all over them. And the only thing I can say is, give me more. Bring them in my doors, Lord. Give me more. About a month ago, this young man that worked in a funeral home that I was at, he comes in, and he comes to me. He says, I'm having health problems. And he says, can you come over and pray with me? I prayed with him. I said, now you need to get in church. And he said, okay, me and my wife will come to church. He came to church, and the first Sunday he got under conviction. The next Sunday he walked the aisle, and he got saved. And him and his wife got baptized the next Sunday. All from doing funerals. He didn't hear a positive message from me. He only heard funeral messages from me till he came to church. You know, when we walk in and we have all the world from our past life on us, when we walk in and our resume is the kind of resume we want to keep hidden in the folder because we don't want to know. I have a lady in my church. She's really sharp. She's really active. And she's become good friends with me and my wife and her husband. And I just recently found out how many marriages she has had. We didn't know. She doesn't want anybody to know. I go, whoa, she does fit this person. But come on in. See, if this person with her baggage was acceptable to Jesus, and Jesus went out of her way to let her know that she was significant, how can I consider myself Christ-like if I do anything less than what he did? I tell you, you're going to come in and you're going to see tattoo sleeves. You're going to see all sorts of stuff. And these are people that I've invested in. They're dear to me. The only difference between them and a lot of other people who have a bad past, theirs is on their skin. Many other people keep it hidden. Look down at verse number 39, and I need to close. And many of the Samaritans of that city believed on him. For the saying of the woman, hold it. What did she say? She didn't say, oh, he did miracles, he didn't glow. You know all he really did? He told me how bad I was. He told me all the garbage of my life. But yet, he sat there and talked amiably. He talked nicely. He accepted me. I seemed significant to him. I seemed to have value to him, even though he knew all the garbage. Verse 39 again. It says that they believed for the saying of the woman which testified, he told me all that ever I did. I know I don't want to, and you don't want to, and none of us want to go say, you know what kind of garbage I did in my life? I mean, I'm a preacher's kid, and I got pretty wild. I want you to know that. I went through a McDonald's drive-thru backwards once. Woo! Man, living on the edge right there. The lady in the window says, y'all are supposed to do it this way. I go, he had the money. Kind of made sense to me. I don't want us to come in and say, this is all the garbage that I've done. But I think we all should say, listen, you don't need to know the garbage that I've done, but you need to know this, that despite all the things that I've done, my Savior has made it very clear that I'm significant to him, that he wants me, he knows me, and he accepts me anyway. And he's the one that made the initial contact. He's the one that reached out and said, hey, can you do something here? And began the conversation. But I'm saying to you, she now has something on the inside that she didn't have before she came to the well. She has a way that she can reach down. She can drop her bucket into her salvation, and she could pull up that joy and use that to share with those around her. And she did. And she did. It's really quite simple. If you have living water inside, listen, I'm giving you a very key to help you with Christian living, okay? Listen. If you have living water inside, you have the resource to draw joy into your life, even when you don't feel like it. I've just given you an important key. It is salvation. The greatest thing that only comes from God. But then once you have that salvation, learning to let that salvation be a key part of your daily life. Troubled Christians, you say, well, I'm very troubled right now. Maybe you haven't learned to drop your bucket into the well of your salvation yet. Because no matter how bad it gets, no matter how bad my day is, I should be able to lay in bed every night and go, whew, I'm saved. My Savior died for me. He loves me. He accepts me no matter how I blew it today. And I could praise. I have a song. I have the joy. And if you can't do that, maybe you need to do some more introspection. Maybe you do not have a well of salvation to draw from. So are you missing joy? Are you having a hard time with happiness? Why don't you just stop and appreciate that God has provided salvation to you and can make that a pattern of your life? Draw from the well. See, God's anger is turned. Fear has been replaced by trust. Strength has replaced weakness, and a song has replaced the humdrum of the daily pursuit of a regular life. My self-esteem, my value, my significance isn't in my good looks. That may surprise you. My value, my significance is not in my talent, my ability, my skill, definitely not my golf. My self-esteem, my value, my significance is in the fact that God is my salvation. Is your life falling apart? Has it been a dark valley? Why don't you drop the bucket into your redeemed soul and let the joy of salvation be brought to the surface and let those around you know. That's a good way, a good pattern to live.